Hey there, and welcome to your video on topics 5.2 and 5.17. This all covers forestry, both non-sustainable methods and sustainable methods. So your first two questions are about old growth forests and second growth forests, and those definitions are right in here. Let me make this a little bit bigger. You've basically, old growth forests are ones that are pristine. They haven't been touched for more than 200 years. They're exactly what you think that they are, which is a very diverse ecosystem of both plants and other organisms. Reservoirs for biodiversity. Second growth is what happens when you have undergone secondary succession. So this occurs in places where humans have basically made a recent change to the forest. The thing to realize that's not in here is that a lot of times the second growth forest will have a different composition than the old growth forest. So what does that mean in terms of forestry logging, which is the cutting down of trees to harvest the wood and sell it for whatever purpose? Even in the logging industry where they replant, the secondary forest may not be super similar to the old growth forest, meaning anything that lived here, its habitat is gone. Another thing to realize is a lot of times with second growth forests, you have a lot of trees that are of the same age. And the problem there is there are certain animals that need a tree of a certain age in order to do their thing, whether it's hunt for insects that live on that tree or be able to drill into it to make a nest, whatever. So do you realize that just because you do have a forest coming back in an area that's been disturbed by humans doesn't mean that the organisms that lived in that old forest will be able to live there. And then you have a tree plantation. It's exactly what it sounds like. It is something that is wholly human created. It contains only one or two species of trees. So it's basically like a cornfield except trees. They're all planted at the same time so that they grow to a economically feasible size at the same time, so they all can be harvested at the same time. Now, the good news is that it's done in a regular cycle. The bad news is, again, you have to clear cut usually old growth forests, and because it's only one or two kind of trees, think like a Christmas tree farm, it's a monoculture with all of the problems associated with monocultures. You don't have that biodiversity that is inherent in there. You definitely don't want mutations to take place, even though they would pre-adapt the organisms to possible future problems. If a pest comes through, a insect or some sort of disease comes through, the entire forest can be wiped out very quickly, partially because it's all the same tree, and then partially because there's no buffer of anything else separating trees. When you have a mixed species forest, if this clump of tree gets a disease, a different clump of the same tree over here may not get it because they're separated by other stuff. So like everything else in this course, lots of pros and cons there. So another pro is, again, you are protecting the topsoil, but then the downside is because you are growing the same thing over and over again, you can eventually deplete the nutrients there, essentially creating a desert if other things will not grow. Okay, so differentiate between, or what are the environmental impacts of roads built to facilitate logging? Okay, so this is, I've seen this before on the national exam. Carefully designed logging roads can have harmful effects, including topsoil erosion, which makes sense, sediment runoff, because remember they're not paved, so it's basically bare earth, habitat loss, biodiversity loss. But this is, logging roads can also open up forests to disturbances from human activities, mining, farming, or ranching. One of the things that's not in here, I will not hold you responsible for this for the quiz, but I will hold you responsible for it on your exam, is that logging roads also open the heart of the forest to invasive species and diseases that may never have touched it before because it was always buffered by the edges here on the outside. So basically, instead of the inner core being protected by the outside layers, you now have this seam that runs through the entire thing, and can conduct invasive species and diseases into the heart of the forest. All right, differentiate between selective cutting, clear cutting, and strip cutting of forests to harvest their timber. What are the benefits and drawbacks of each technique? Do make sure that you just read this. Selective cutting is exactly what it sounds like. You select certain trees that are of a certain maturity to cut them down, and then you leave most of the forest largely intact. Obviously, this is better for biodiversity. It's less invasive, but in terms of, not in terms of invasive species, but it's less impactful. And especially if you leave the stump and the roots, you're not going to have that soil erosion. And then oftentimes, well, not oftentimes, but some trees will resprout from their stump. The problem is, of course, you can, it's tough. It's expensive. You've got to go in there and cut these things down without them knocking over other trees. You maneuver equipment in there in between other existing trees. It's tough. It's a lot harder. So that means it's more expensive. Clear cutting is a lot less expensive and it's a lot quicker. It's just where you basically cut everything down. It's most efficient and cost effective. Again, profits in the shortest time. So, and the obvious things happen. Loss of biodiversity, loss of habitat. The tree stumps, if the roots die, that means that you have bare soil, and so you have soil erosion, and that soil washes into waterways. And now you have the earth heats up because you don't have the shade from the trees, and then also it's dark earth, and that absorbs more of the sun's energy. You also are removing all of the ecosystem services that trees provide. The creation of oxygen, the carbon sequestration, storing in them. Trees are a part of the water cycle too. Remember this. They store water within their bodies, and then also transpiration. They release into the atmosphere. Not good. Not good if you're cutting down an entire forest. But you need to be able to articulate on the national exam. It's not enough to say clear cutting a forest is bad. Point? No point. You need to follow that with the word because, and then go into detail. Not because a lack of trees is bad for the ecosystem. Again, you've said nothing. You need to say because trees naturally provide through photosynthesis oxygen, which many organisms need in order to survive. Please don't say breathe, because you can breathe all sorts of things. Of course, you die really soon, but again, specificity. Don't just say gobbledygook, nothing. All right. Strip cutting is kind of a middle ground between the two. Let's see. Did I just skip around 267, 269? Okay, so this is all about deforestation. Please make sure that I'm going to get back to that in a second after the other question, but here's strip cutting right here. Okay, it's basically what it sounds like. You cut a strip, and then you move on to the next strip while letting this grow back. So again, it's kind of a middle ground between this and this. Let me see if they have, let's see through here. Strip cutting, not so much. So it's basically this. I'm sure it's somewhere in the text. I'm just here it is. Oh, look, it's the very first paragraph. Okay, so here's the description of strip cutting. All right, and if you need to see a kind of a infographic on tree plantations, there's one right here. And this also very much explains what roads do to the forest. It also explains how slowly but surely you end up clearing a forest. So remember, clearing a forest, as we've discussed before, is not just for selling of the logs. Remember, you have slash and burn agriculture. Maybe you want to go ahead and have grassland there instead for livestock. There are all sorts of reasons why you're going to, or people want to live there. You can engage in deforestation. What is deforestation? It's all right here. Ecological impacts, I think I've gone through those again, but a lot of students make the mistake of thinking they can just read it once and be like, yeah, I kind of know this. I would, if I were you, say to yourself, list 2 specific reasons or 2 specific ecological impacts of deforestation. Ecological means their impact on everything pretty much except for people. So please make sure if you're talking about things like oxygen, you're relating it to organisms that live in the forest itself. So, impacts to the carbon cycle, impacts to the water cycle, dehydrating the topsoil. Definitely go back in here and make some notes. I'm trying to do this slow enough so that it's not super blurry and moving around. Do note things that are specific to different types of forests. Definitely take a look at, what happens in terms of inevitable overgrazing, and then farmers who end up finishing the depletion of nutrients, and then this is where you have, again, desertification. All right, so what type of biome will a deforested area eventually become? If it is partially depleted, it can become a grassland. If it's completely depleted, you're going to end up with a desert. All right, describe the typical pattern that anthropogenic tropical forest destruction follows. It's all right in here, so please do make sure that you read that particular paragraph or 2. Why can tropical deforestation be allowed to occur? What else are these folks going to eat? What else are they going to do to provide for their families in the moment? It's very easy for those with privilege and with the ability to implement sustainable techniques to go ahead and say, well, you guys shouldn't be doing this. Well, if your choices are this or starving, perhaps this is what you're going to end up doing. So it's one of the reasons why addressing solutions to this doesn't include just coming in and going, you guys are doing it wrong, you should be doing it like this, and leaving. You need to really give folks some viable, immediate ways to combat this. Pay folks to reforest. Help them establish an ecotourism business so that they are making money from folks coming to see the tropical rainforest. If you're going to teach folks sustainable techniques, stick around long enough to allow them to take root, as it were. Pay folks to replenish the topsoil. So, and why does this stuff not happen? You've probably heard me mention this several times just now, and it's usually funding. That is usually a large barrier to changing the way that things are done. Why does the use of fuel wood accelerate deforestation? I mean, that should be obvious. If you live in a place where wood and then charcoal, which is made from wood, is your main source of heat and light and cooking energy, you are going to cut down that tree. And you're probably also not going to be in a financial situation where you're going to be able to replant. So then the inevitable happens in terms of soil erosion. How did deforestation increase the impact of earthquakes in Haiti? You can read down right here, largely because trees were cut for fuel wood to make charcoal. And then also, it's not just charcoal, but also to make room for farming. Less than 2% of the land is now covered with trees. So imagine what happens to a land like this. Let's pretend there's a little bit of topsoil still left here. And then an earthquake comes. And it's not just one big shake, it's lots of little shakes after that. And especially where you have mountains, which you do in Haiti, any topsoil that's left ends up shaking into the ocean and it's gone, leaving behind a desert area where nothing is going to grow. Not just only trees, but also farming becomes a huge problem, both agriculture and then livestock, because they don't have anything to eat either. So that took the devastation that occurs during an earthquake and made it just that much worse. because folks were left with no way of being able to feed themselves when it was done. All right, so what are some techniques for sustainable forestry? First of all, some of the stuff we're going to talk about is going to seem kind of depressing. I really want to make sure that you take the time to see some success stories, and Costa Rica is one of those. They, between 63 and 83, really cleared most of their forests in order to graze cattle. And then at some point, the government decided to fund, this is key, the planting of the replanting basically of their forests. So they've got right here, they established reserves and parks, which are land that are specifically set aside for animals, and it varies. Some of it is tourists can come in, and some of it is completely off limits to everyone except for the animals that live there. And then you can also see, and this is great, they set aside some of the land for its indigenous people. So you can see right here, the government eliminated subsidies for converting forest land to grazing land. That is something that we are going to address more in class. And instead, it pays landowners to maintain or restore tree cover. So you get what you pay for, in this case, literally. And so you can see over 3 decades, forests went from covering 20% of its land to covering 50%. So this is, again, where deciding something is important, and then this is key, funding that change, and the change happens. And I would also imagine that once the forest came back, folks could go ahead and set up those ecotourism businesses to take people back into the rapidly rejuvenating ecosystem, which then means that those people who run those companies can afford to then perhaps purchase food that they cannot grow themselves. Refresh your memory regarding the ecosystem and economic services that forests provide humans in the environment. You can go back in your notes and take a look at that. All right. The question, what is a surface fire? Why are surface fires beneficial? I left an L there out. I'm sure you can make a lot of jokes about leaving out the L. Anyway, I can't think of one right now that makes any sense. So, going ahead and starting here, we need to know the difference between a surface fire and a crown fire. So surface fires are exactly what it sounds like. They simply, so basically here, let me just back up. Not too long ago, we thought that preventing forest fires entirely was a good thing until our forest fires, when we did have them, ended up being, they were forest killers completely. So this is where you need to know the difference between a surface fire and a crown fire. A surface fire is quick, low heat, and basically low to the ground. And when I mean low heat, it's still fire, but I mean in terms of fire temperatures, it's pretty low. So it basically just grabs all the stuff in the underbrush, the understory, which is like the shrubs down, and it moves very quickly. And so it depends on moving from dry brush to dry brush to dry brush, and largely leaving the trees alone. So what does it do? That burned up brush is plant nutrients are released because of it. Seeds are released. There are a lot of pine cones that won't drop their seeds or germinate without being touched by fire. And then and there are a lot of insects and diseases that are killed by fire. So there are a lot of, we've already seen grasslands depend on it. A lot of forests depend upon fire as well. Here in Southwest Florida, a lot of our slash pine forests really depend upon regular fires. Why did we used to stop these fires, by the way? Because people live near forests, because forests are pretty and fires are scary. Well, here's the problem. When you allow all that brush to build up, when you do have the inevitable fire, whether it's from human carelessness, arson, or a lightning strike, it is hot, it stays in one place, and it kills the forest because it leaps from treetop to treetop. The entire tree is just decimated. Everything builds up, and these things, the burning ash can literally float in the wind and light other trees on fire. Now, what are some things that can also make this worse? climate change, when you have trees that have dried out because of excessive drought, when they're not used to it, that's also an issue. So how can we avoid this? And this is where you get into what are called prescribed burns. It's just like a prescription. You go in there and firefighters now not only fight fires, they have learned how to set fires and manage them so that they, in places where there hasn't been a fire in a little bit, you go and you set one to go ahead and basically create a surface fire. But here's the other thing. Folks are going to live close to a fire-prone area, need to learn how to live there. You don't get to have a lot of lush stuff around your house. You need to live a certain amount back from the forest, and you need to not use things that are flammable, maybe clay tiles instead of shingles. So that's a whole part of that whole thing right there. Abolishing fires completely is a poor forest management practice, as we said. Describe several ways to limit the harmful effect of fires. I think I already went over that right here. Here are some more things that can be done. Consumers simply, okay, we already did prescribed burn. Ooh, I think I left some questions off here. So I'm going to have to go over some of this stuff with you guys in class. 359. Put in some weird pages here. All right, even though I don't have questions on this stuff, obviously, let's just go ahead and talk about managing forests in general. And this is where you as consumers can emphasize how important it is that we sustain forests in other countries by simply not buying wood from other countries. And if you do, make sure it's sustainably produced. And then again, get governments through subsidies and tax breaks to emphasize reforesting as opposed to deforesting. And again, Costa Rica is really doing a great job of doing that. How have forests been depleted here in the United States? Definitely take a look at this. It's rather shocking. Now we have, through the park system, reinvigorated our forests, but you can see they aren't nearly what they were. And this is also where, if we can just reduce demand for forest products in general, what can we do about paper? And how can we make sure that we're not using excessive packaging? What about making recycled paper more exciting? Are there pulp alternatives that we can grow and use? So, can we go back to cloth? So there are things that we can do to kind of help to preserve our forests. And that is the end of our video.